I should probably look over there first, huh?
And roll call for Senate Revenue. Senator Case.
Present.
Senator French.
Here.
Senator Ide.
Here.
Senator Pappas.
Here.
And Chairman McEwen.
Here.
All present.
The first bill we'll look at is exemption for transported fuel and power sales amendments. Representative Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, committee. Hopefully this bill is easy, but we'll see. Just to give a little bit of a status of kind of where this came from. So there was an issue a few years ago, and I don't know the exact years, but there was a local oil company, and what they found was they were taking a look at their exemptions related to their electrical power exemptions related to their pipelines. And they realized that they believed that their collection pipelines, and now we're talking about the gathering lines, basically. They believed that they were exempt. And there was a process that they went through where it was found that was the case. That was found to be the case. And then there were some changes made to some laws and some things that we adjusted, and what happened was that went away. And what this is a bill to do is to put that back in place. And so just to kind of summarize at a very highest level what this bill does. So currently previously there was a fairly well-known exemption for the larger pipelines that are moving that bulk oil across in and out of the state and across the state. But then this exemption for the gathering lines was ultimately found to be considered a valid exemption. And then with it going away again, this bill just brings it back for the gathering lines. Now, the clear the line of definition here is that this exemption is only for those surface gathering lines that are moving the oil. This does not affect and did not go to the electrical power that was used for the actual extraction of the oil. So the exemption does not cross that line. So it's important to note that this bill is all it did. It was basically restoring that exemption that was in place for those gathering lines, not to cross that barrier of the exemption for the pulling up of the oil. So anyway, I'll go into the bill just real quick. The bulk of this bill, and you'll see we make just a few minor changes in here, but the bulk of this bill is all on page 2, and I won't torture everybody with going through it in extreme detail. But in short, if you look at page 2, basically everything's in that paragraph E of 3915-105 and the exemptions, section A, Romanet 3, paragraph E. And basically what we've done to that paragraph is we've just added into this paragraph some language that says, regardless of the ownership of the transportation of the transported tangible personal property. And then you'll see the changes down in lines 17 through 23 where we add in some additional language. As used in this subparagraph, pipeline means a system of connecting pipes and other equipment that is used to transport oil, natural gas, and other hydrocarbons from the well site to an interstate or intrastate transmission customer sale point, including between intermediate points along the transportation path. Okay, so this is really truly just clarifying language, because at one point I believe the Department of Equalization did find this to be a fair exemption, and so this was just an attempt to add this clarifying language to allow, again, those gathering lines to have that electrical exemption, and hopefully that I explained that well enough, and I know there's probably people in this room that will explain it even better than me, but I stand for questions.
Questions?
Quick question.
Of course you do. Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a quick one. I always short question. When you mentioned exclusively surface gathering lines. Does that mean they're above ground or are they subsurface or what are you referring to there? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Ide. So whether these pipelines are truly above the ground or not, what they are all about is it's the gathering lines that are moving that oil to a larger collection point on the surface, whether they're covered by dirt or not covered by dirt. But my point is, it's really for that moving on the above ground is a loose term, so I'm going to be careful with that. But whether, like I said, whether it's buried or not buried, the point is it's for the gathering lines from the well site to the other collection points. But it has nothing to do, this exemption has nothing to do with what the electrical power used for the extraction of the oil itself. So that's the distinction I was trying to make. And that this bill actually was designed to not transition from I'm moving stuff, I'm moving oil through my gathering lines. It's not to be confused with it's electrical power that's used to actually extract the oil. So.
Thank you, Representative Locke. Will you hang out for a little while?
Mr. Chairman,
Department?
absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue. Great to be here today to speak to House Bill 11, exemption for transported fuel and power sales amendments. A little history. During the interim of 2023, the Revenue Committee asked the Department of Revenue to identify areas where clarification would be helpful for vendors and for taxpayers. Among one of the areas was the exemption stated in 3915-105 III. The exemption at that time read as follows, and you're welcome to follow along on page 2 of House Bill 311, starting on line 8. E at that time read, sales of power or fuel to a person engaged in the transportation business. Let me say that again, engaged in the transportation business, when the same is consumed directly in the generating motive power for actual transportation purposes. And then it continues on. This had been administered by the Department of Revenue as railroad and pipeline historically. When a taxpayer requested an exemption to move their own product, we denied that exemption. What we did do is provide an opportunity for the legislature to say if that was their intention and if we understood their intention accurately. Included in House Bill 197 last year, the language that you see on page 2, starting on line, was inserted. Sales of power or fuel to a person transporting tangible personal property by railroad or by pipeline. House Bill 197 was effective July 1 of 2024. Again, in our ongoing effort to be transparent, we opened up our Chapter 2 rules to conform to the changes to coincide with the language from House Bill 197. One of those was to include a definition of pipeline. The definition was based on Attorney General guidance, again, providing clarity as to how the sales tax exemption for power or fuel had been administered historically. No changes. The definition of pipeline aligns with how transportation is treated in other areas of statute. I'd like to read to you the definition in our Chapter 2 Excise Tax Division rules. Pipeline means a system of connected links of large diameter pipes which are used to transport oil, natural gas, or other hydrocarbons over long distances under high pressure to an eventual interstate or intrastate customer sales point. A pipeline does not include pipes or other equipment used as part of a gathering system which collects and moves oil, natural gas, or other hydrocarbons from well sites to either a central point of delivery, initial storage tank, lease automatic custody transfer or LACT unit, or to the inlet of an intrastate or interstate transmission pipeline. The rulemaking process is extensive, and rightfully so. It takes several months, where verbiage is reviewed by the Wyoming Secretary of State Office, Attorney General Office, the Public Legislative Service Office, Management Council, and the Governor's Office. Public comment opened May 1st, 2024, and closed on June 21st, 2024, a total of 51 days. We received 0 public comment, and when public comments were not submitted, we took that to mean the definition was sufficient to ensure uniform interpretation of this exemption. Again, confirming how we had historically administered this exemption. Those current rules took effect September 4th of 2024. I must mention current litigation. A mineral producer advocates that power used to transport their own product, once it's been extracted, is exempt. The question of going back to that original language of engaged in the transportation business is currently before the Wyoming Supreme Court. We don't have a decision on what is the definition of engaged in the transportation business. Make no mistake, House Bill 311 clearly provides an exemption that has not been available in the past due to our interpretation and administration of the exemption. If passed, House Bill 311 would be in effect July 1, 2025, and applicable from that point forward. If this legislature makes the policy decision to grant this exemption, of course, we will administer it accordingly. And with that, I'd stand for any questions.
Questions?
Thank you,
job.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Public comment?
Hello, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Pete Obermueller, President of the Petroleum Association of Wyoming. Thanks so much for hearing this bill, and thank you to the good chairman of House Revenue for bringing it and explaining it. I think he did a good job of explaining it. So, Mr. Chairman, let me just be clear about the policy question that we're asking you to decide. It's pretty simple, really. Major pipelines, interstate pipelines, already receive an exemption on the sales tax for the purchase of electricity required to power the pumping units and the rest of the equipment in order to move oil and gas through those pipelines, interstate pipelines. The question for you today is, should that exemption extend to the smaller pipelines that go from the wellhead to the larger pipelines? So, yeah, should that sales tax exemption go from wellhead all the way to the end point of pipelines in Wyoming? That's the question before you. And the reason why I want to highlight that so clearly is because that question, the policy question, was not provided to the Revenue Committee during the interim of 2023. It simply was not. Instead, what we had happen was a sales tax revisions, essentially technical corrections that was brought before the committee. That changed, as the director pointed out, that changed it from saying engaged in the transportation business to pipeline. And then a rulemaking after that changed it back to what the department had preferred. So what happened is just a real brief explanation of the timeline. One of my member companies had, of course, through a sales tax audit, which happens relatively regularly for my members to go through an audit with the department. And they discovered that they thought their gathering lines should in fact qualify for the exemption. So they applied to receive the sales tax exemption. The department, as the director mentioned, denied that. So my member went to the State Board of Equalization following the process that's allowed for taxpayers in Wyoming. And the State Board of Equalization agreed with the taxpayer. They should receive this exemption. Not once, but twice. The SBOE ruled in favor of the taxpayer. So while it may not have been the way the department had operated the exemption prior to that, a major taxpayer in the state qualified for the exemption using the process that's allowed for taxpayers. So the exemption did exist. And then what happened was, of course, in order to get out of that engaged in transportation, had to change it to pipeline, which is fine. That works. I don't have any trouble with the way that reads in statute. But in order to overrule the SBOE's ruling in favor of the taxpayer, the definition of pipeline had to be written to specifically exclude gathering lines. And Mr. Chairman, it's my opinion, you kind of have to go through some contortions to do that. The director read to you their definition, which includes the phrase, a pipeline does not include pipes, Mr. Chairman. That doesn't make sense to us. But furthermore, even the rest of the definition that talks about large diameter pipes used to transport oil, other hydrocarbons over long distances under high pressure, none of those words we were not engaged as pipeline stakeholders about what do those words mean. It's conceivable that under the department's definition that no pipeline is eligible for the exemption any longer. So we need a better definition, and that's where the bill came from. And we agree with the director that it is up to the legislature to define intent. And, whichever way you go, of course, it's up to you. It is a policy decision. I want to be clear about what that policy is. Should they or should they not extend to gathering lines? Now, on that policy, here's why I think it should extend to pipelines, to gathering lines. First, and this committee knows it, you had a bill that would exempt all electricity purchases from sales tax. That would have been the solution I would have generally preferred, certainly easier. But it is a way for this legislature to deal with power costs, the largest single cost to my members other than labor, in a way that doesn't create a whole new system. That's been kind of the sticking point in how we deal with power costs and all of that in Wyoming. That's number one. Number two, most companies in the Powder River Basin and other places, when they're producing oil, also produce associated gas. They use that associated gas to power their equipment for this purpose. All of that is tax-free. They do not pay tax on using associated gas to power their equipment. But if you look in other parts of the state, your neck of the woods, Senator Case, the Bighorn Basin, they don't produce associated gas. They produce heavy sour crude. So they don't have the option of using associated gas. They have to purchase power in order to do this. And then pay tax on it. It's a fundamental imbalance between my own members on what sort of tax treatment they get in order to bring resources, to transport resources. So finally, Mr. Chairman, and I'll open to question, there's not a fiscal note on the bill. One of the reasons why there's not a fiscal note on the bill is because it's indeterminate right now about how much it will cost, because the bill does not apply from underground to surface. Companies are going to have to essentially self-certify, and the department will have to work that out, how much power it takes to get from subsurface to surface, and how much power it takes to get from wellhead to pipe. Now, the one company that did the appeal did that, hired a third party and did that work. But if other companies are going to qualify for exemption, they're going to have to show how much power it takes to get from wellhead to pipeline. They're not going to get it for the whole. So it's a pretty narrow fix from a fiscal standpoint, particularly because so many of the major oil and gas producers and pipelines use associated, or gathering lines use associated gas, and major pipelines already have the exemption. We're talking about a pretty narrow fix here. But it's an important one, Mr. Chairman, particularly given the process. And let me just close by saying I have a lot of respect for the Department of Revenue. We have to work with them on all sorts of things, being Wyoming's major taxpayer, and they do a great job and they're professionals. Even professionals get it wrong sometimes, and Mr. Chairman, I think they got it wrong this time.
Questions? Senator Pappas.
Thank you. Not really related to the bill, but I do have a question on the new language that was put in, but it's based on the old language. On line 20 and on page 2, it says transport of oil, natural gas, or other hydrocarbons, right? That's been in there forever. I know in your industry, you're transporting now CO2 a lot. Is that not covered?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the director might know whether she has applied, whether the department has applied it to CO2 previously for the major CO2 pipelines. I'm not sure whether the department has or not, to be honest. But I'm glad you asked this question because, Mr. Chairman, I do have one tiny little, just one word of an amendment to add because those major pipelines, in reviewing this, we're worried. One of the things, for us is just make sure you do no harm. You don't want to take away something people already have. And there's a little bit of a concern from a couple of my members that perhaps we would inadvertently take the sales tax exemption away from the major pipelines with this language. And so, Mr. Chairman, on page 2, line 22, after the word sales, we simply suggest that you insert the word delivery. Yep, you just insert that one word. And that ensures, Mr. Chairman, that if the bill passes, then the exemption would apply from wellhead to wherever it ends up being delivered, whether that's out of Wyoming, at a refinery in Wyoming, wherever it's delivered is where it goes, is where the exemption applies. So the full life of its transportation path, wellhead to leaving the state.
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Maybe I should have been quicker on my feet when the department was here, but so pipelines are state assessed, right? Would that be true? And then gathering facilities are locally assessed? That's my guess. Is that true?
I believe that's correct, Mr. Chairman.
So, Mr. Chairman, at least somebody knows what they're talking about. I mean, it may not have been written very well for the exemption and may have different words, but people know what's state assessed and what's locally assessed. I mean, the tax assessors know, the department knows, and the companies know. I mean, they know the difference between gathering lines and pipelines, right? I mean, you all do, even if it's not written very well for the exemption. Would that be fair?
I'm not sure I follow the question, Senator Case, Mr. Chairman. Would you mind restating?
Well, Mr. Chairman, go ahead. In your argument for the bill, talked about how collection lines in the department's definition of qualifying for the exemption, collection lines didn't sound that much different than pipelines. I mean, that's kind of the narrative here. They're kind of the same thing at a different level. But we have been dividing them up for a long time by some method.
Yeah.
Apparently, that's my point.
Mr. Chairman, I think I follow. You'll correct me if I don't. Yeah, you're exactly right. And that difference, the difference between the two as it relates to the exemption was challenged at the SBOE because the former statutory language said engaged in transportation. So the question was, what is transportation as it relates to this exemption? And that's where the SBOE and the Department of Revenue disagreed. So in order to solve that problem from the DLR's perspective, you got to get rid of the language engaged in transportation and you have to insert pipeline. That's okay. But then you also have to have the definition that does not include pipes, but then talks about used as part of a gathering system which collects and moves oil. Like the definition now is very specific to gathering lines.
Right.
So a clever workaround. I will give it that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Obermueller. Will you hang out for a little while with us? How we doing?
Very well, Mr. Chairman. Robert Short, Commerce County. I'm neither for nor against this bill, but I'm curious as to the administration of the cost allocation associated with transport. As a contractor who's installed countless miles of power line and electrical apparatus associated with the extraction industry in our state, typically there's a single point of delivery for electrical power into most of the larger facilities. So the cost associated with transportation in a gathering system will be directly related to distance, volume, and of course viscosity associated with a liquid asset. So it would seem that perhaps to get an accurate accounting, we'd need some way to meter the exact electrical usage associated with that transport from the wellhead to whatever sales point or delivery point would be defined as that location where the power consumption associated with the transport would be deemed ceased. So that's the one part that for me is a little bit confounding. If I take power from a single point and I use it across multiple apparatus, how am I going to designate accurately the power that I'm using specifically for the transport in the collection system, Mr. Chairman?
I'm gonna have to phone a friend on that one.
The commissioner and I, Mr. Chairman, can leg wrestle about this in the hallway. But to have the quick dialogue through you, Mr. Chairman, is that it's already been done by the company that made this challenge. They hired a third party to essentially do exactly what the commissioner is mentioning. Meter out which one was which. And then that's what they appealed to the department about, and that's what the SBOE agreed on. Now, he's right that if you want the exemption, you're gonna have to go through that. Otherwise, you won't know what the power is. So it is what it is. If you want the exemption, you gotta do the work to earn the exemption. He's right about that.
Don't start the leg wrestling match until we can get out and watch. Do we have any other testimony?
Mr. Chairman, that sub-meterings, that's pretty common in a lot of factories and, you can put a sub-meter on your side of the main disconnect to monitor how load and electricity flows. It's common.
Even in grocery stores?
Probably. I don't know about that meat grinder, though. Sucker is a power hog.
Use a pedal for that.
Any other comments? Okay, committee, what's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Second. Moved by Senator Ide, seconded by Senator French. I think, anybody have any amendments on page 1?
Mr. Chairman. That's page 2. Oh, I thought you said the bill, so I was just trying to help you.
Page 2? Go get him, big boy.
Yeah, there you go. It was suggested that, Mr. Chairman, it was suggested on page 2, line 22, after sales, to add delivery.
The amendment's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? That amendment has passed. Page 3. Sensing that you're ready for the vote.
We have some discussion.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been trying to think about this bill a lot. I think the strongest argument they kind of make in favor of it is kind of the equity argument from producers that have associated gas with producers that don't. But the more I think about it, I'm not sure I understand why we would necessarily do this bill. So the pumping costs from in the ground up are, no one's contending that that electricity should be exempt. So some companies have more pumping costs than others. You know, they may have to produce more water, they're deeper. I don't know all the factors there, but there would be differences in fields. There would also be differences in gathering lines depending on the fields. It's kind of the luck of the draw, I suppose, or how old the field is, or just probably a myriad of things. But to get your oil to a place where you can get it to a major pipeline, some companies will have a better circumstance than others, but it's all part of the cost of producing that oil. And some companies are lucky in that they have associated gas, and they can use that associated gas to drive their pumping. But that's just kind of all part of the luck of the draw in my mind. You know, and some wells are deeper, some are less. I don't have to give exemptions to make it fairer, whatever. It's a cost of production. If I buy something, if you buy a new meat grinder, you're gonna pay sales tax on that. That's a cost of your production. Just like the pumping cost is a cost. And I'm not sure why we run to give it an exemption. I do think there's a definitional problem, and I guess we got to square this up somehow with the Board of Equalization's interpretation, or the department's got to take another crack at rules, or I'm not quite sure how we square that up, but I'm not persuaded that we have to give the exemption on anything other than there was a fairness argument, which I don't buy, and that the Board of Equalization worked one way. We write the laws. I'll throw that out.
I won't get a new meat grinder.
Cost you 5%, 5.5%.
I will get a hamburger manufacturing station. Okay, sorry, I digress.
Yes, you will.
That was low hanging fruit.
It was.
Okay, any other comments?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, obviously, I'm in favor of this. Anything that, in my mind, that is business friendly and makes it easier on the people actually out there doing doing the work, doing the production. And I mean, I understand the argument, my colleague next to me here, but I think for too long we've gone in the other direction, and we need to be more business friendly. So this is a good free market to help the producers out here and make them excited to do business in our state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further discussion? Donna, you want to call the roll?
This is a roll call vote on House Bill 311 as amended, exemption for transported fuel and power sales amendments. Senator Case.
No.
Senator French.
Aye.
Senator Ide.
Aye.
Senator Pappas.
Aye.
Chairman McEwen.
Aye.
You have 4 aye and 1 no, Mr. Chairman.
House Bill 311 has passed the Revenue Committee.
And I noticed there's not a House sponsor. I'd be happy to help them with it.
It's right there.
Or a Senate sponsor.
Representative Locke. Representative Locke, will you approach real quick? I always wanted to say that.
Yeah, that's pretty
Come on
powerful.
up here. Okay, the next resolution we'll take up is, or next bill we'll take up is House Joint Resolution number 4. Representative Stivar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring you today House Joint Resolution number 4, Constitutional Amendment, Veterans Property Tax. We're just adding in to Article 15, Section 12 of the Wyoming Constitution. If you're 100% total and permanent veteran, as deemed through the VA, that you shouldn't have to pay property tax. And I think 20 states already have a homestead exemption, property tax exemption for veterans. There's only 1% of the population that actually serve in the military. And I think putting this out to the public to vote on, to see if they're willing to do that, is why I did it. This came from, don't take it personal, Senator Pappas, but Scott O'Grady, an Air Force pilot that was shot down in Bosnia, is the one that brought this to me, and I spent quite a few hours talking with him and working with him to bring this. So I'll stand for any questions.
Questions? Do we have any comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joey Correnti. I am a retired disabled combat veteran. And the one thing that stands out to me is that this is coming out as a constitutional amendment, and that kind of gets my attention. It's our founding document, something all of us, not only in the military, but all of you have sworn an oath to one way or another, or multiple ways, like the colonel and the general. The 100% total and permanent disabled vets are actually the best financially off. Not that they're well off, but of disabled veterans, they receive the largest amount of compensation. They may still have ravaging medical needs, but this isn't a medical issue. This is a financial issue, and they're doing the best of all of them. And in order to qualify for this program, you already have to own a home. So it's kind of, in my mind, saying we're going to change the Constitution to say the financially best off who are already in a pretty good position because you own a home, we're going to do something extra for you. But the homeless veterans, the struggling veterans who can't get the rating because they can't navigate the system, are kind of being left to their own. I just don't understand why it's being proposed as a constitutional amendment. The fact that we just passed a constitutional amendment that authorized a fourth class of property and the opportunity to take up creating a subclass of owner-occupied residential property, this proposal steps around all of that and creates a subclass of a subclass of a subclass. Residential property owner who's a veteran, who's disabled, who's 100% totally and permanently disabled. And I think it could be done better. And I think you have a great opportunity to avoid yourselves voting out of patriotism and guilt and then asking the people of Wyoming to do the same, because that's probably how it's going to go. To embrace the concept of local control, because every board of county commissioner in the state has the ability to say, well, we're not going to claim these fees from those veterans. They've come and talked to us. We passed a resolution. There's things that even an auditor can do beyond the $6,000 tax relief any disabled veteran gets when they qualify. All of those things can be relieved at the local level. And we could be doing that in a time where we say, we're going to send it back to you counties while you're already worried about your tax revenue coming in from property taxes next year based off of questions we haven't answered yet this session. So I'm not against it. I'm not against the spirit of this. I'm concerned that it's going to possibly amend one of our core founding documents, create a class of people that I already belong to. I am a 100% totally and permanently disabled veteran. It's not going to provide me enough help to feel good about forgetting my brothers and sisters in arms who don't have homes, who don't have the medical or financial assistance they need and aren't getting any extra help navigating that system. And that we're doing it, again, kind of out of a sense of patriotism and guilt and not engaging the constitutional change we just made. I think this is a great idea. I love the spirit of it. I would love to work with any of you, the bringer of the bill, the Veterans Commission. Get out there and let's get it done through the counties. Because in the financial or the fiscal note, it does say there's a specific number of identified 100% total and disabled veterans. I believe it's 2,960 something. So they have that number. They know who we are. Nobody reached out and asked. Nobody said, is there a different way, a better way, another way? Or who amongst you really needs help? So if we really need help, we would have engaged. I'm sure some people could use it. But the great thing about the veteran community is we're a caring and giving community. And when we know our brothers and sisters need it, we'll step up and get it done. We can engage our military department, our Veterans Commission, when we know. But if things are being done on our behalf so people can look good, feel better, slap a patriotic sticker on, go find a homeless vet. Go give him something to pay property tax on. I would prefer that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I stand for any questions.
Questions? Director Henson? Anything on this? Nothing? Thank you.
There we go. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name's Pat Macy, just a normal citizen who is very, very excited to see this bill come up. I've been looking at this for quite a long time as far as other states that have the same or similar provisions in their laws. I was able to sit down and quickly calculate there's at least 13 states that offer a 100% tax exemption. I heard the bringer of the bill say 20. It depends on how you parse it, but there are at least 13 that have a full 100% property tax exemption for 100% permanent and total disabled veterans. Questions that have come to my mind on this over time and investigating this and looking at it is that maybe the permanent and total part is a bit restrictive, that 100% disabled veteran is 100% disabled veteran, whether they're permanent and total or not. For those of you who are familiar with the system, P&T is a difficult place to get. It takes time. You can be 100% with the VA and you cannot be permanent and total. It generally takes an amount of time before the VA will actually classify you as permanent and total. Sometimes it's faster than others. Would I think that 100% disabled veteran or a veteran that's on TDIU, which is total disability, individually unemployable, would I think that they would benefit from this also? I do, and most of the states give that also as a benefit to TDIU veterans. Not all, but some. I'm excited for this because I actually have been looking for a couple, 3 years on states that offer veterans benefits that are better than what Wyoming offers, and I think Wyoming could step up and do this. To the gentleman's point about this being a constitutional amendment, I'm not sure if that's really the right way to do it. It is a way to do it. I think it guarantees permanence. By doing it as a constitutional amendment, you therefore avoid the fact that a later legislature could come and change it without going through a vote of the people process. To where if you just did it as a regular bill, that later on someone could come up and make amendments to it, changes to it, and reduce its value. Other than that, I rise in support of this amendment. I think it's a fair thing to do. It's in keeping with what other states are doing. And I'll stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Questions? Do we have any other comment? I guess we will close public comment. Your choice. Okay, discussion?
Move the bill? Want to move it and then discuss it, or how do we do that?
Yeah, we need to move it.
I'll move it.
It's been moved by Senator Ide, seconded by Senator French. Now discussion.
Mr. Chairman? Yeah, you know what? I think everybody by now knows where I'm at on property taxes for the most part. You know, this is definitely, in my opinion, a step in the right direction. The only problem with the bill is it doesn't expand it further to more property owners getting 100% exemption. So anyway, I'm on in favor of the bill, Mr. Chairman. I think it's a good bill, and I think we should get something, you know, in our Constitution, give our veterans benefit here. Thank you.
Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'm all for the concept of doing that for 100% disabled. I just don't think it should be in a constitutional amendment. I think we're putting things in the constitutional, in the Constitution that I think are really, should be in statute so that, yes, other legislatures in times can decide on this issue. I think that putting it in the Constitution, I mean, why don't we just put everything in the Constitution, right? Every statute that we do. I just don't think it's the right place. I agree with it. I just don't think it ought to be in the Constitution. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Donna, you want to call the roll?
This is a roll call vote on House Joint Resolution 4, Constitutional Amendment, Veterans Property Tax Exemption. Senator Case?
No.
Senator French?
Aye.
Senator Ide?
Aye.
Senator Pappas?
No.
Chairman McEwen?
Aye.
We have 3 aye and 2 no, Mr. Chairman.
That has passed the Revenue Committee.
The sponsor of the next bill told me he was across the hall in House Revenue. Would you like me to go get him? Or not House Revenue, but House Education?
Yeah, that would be good. Thank you, Donna. Go ahead,
My
Representative.
apologies for keeping you waiting.
Oh, you didn't keep us waiting.
Good. I appreciate your time and consideration of this bill. I bring House Bill 134 for your consideration. This bill ensures that taxpayer money is not used to support events that some may find inappropriate or offensive, keeping government spending aligned with community standards and values. By restricting public funding for sexually explicit events, the bill helps ensure that content funded by state and federal money remains suitable for general audiences, particularly in educational and community settings. The bill empowers local officials, such as school boards and city councils, to determine what is appropriate for their communities, allowing for decisions that reflect local values rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. By requiring repayment if funds are used improperly, the bill creates accountability and discourages public institutions from financially supporting events that may be considered inappropriate by the majority of taxpayers. Wyoming has some instances where, for instance, last year, $3,000 was spent, taxpayer money was spent to an entity that put on a drag queen event. And it did outrage a lot of people. In the last 5 years, $1.3 million has been spent in grants to organizations that put on similar events that are just inappropriate. So that's what this bill is meant to address and try to keep from happening. So with that, I'll kind of walk you briefly through the bill. Page 1, lines 1 through 7 describes the bill. Section 1 creates a new statute. And page 2, subsection A defines sexually explicit event. And there was an amendment to add drag queen event to the description because it was originally not in there. And when I talked to our legal staff, they said the original language probably would not have covered a drag queen event. So that's why that was added in there. Subsection B explains what is prohibited. Page 3, subsection C, lines 1 through page 4, line 6 details what governing bodies will be responsible in determining what specific events are sexually explicit or not, based on the venue. Page 4, lines 8 to 22 outlines the process in determining whether an event is sexually explicit under subsection C. And there is an appeal process specified on lines 19 through 22. Page 5, subsection E details the refund process if taxpayer money was used for an event deemed sexually explicit. And then, of course, there is the effective date in section 2. With that, I would stand for any questions.
Questions, committee? Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Representative, I'm trying to understand with the additional language on line 10, page 2. I'm kind of trying to understand the causality here. It says sexually explicit event shall include drag queen events. Is that by definition? I mean, can you have a drag queen event that's not sexually explicit and would be okay? Or by definition, is it bad? I might have follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Case, I find it hard to find an instance based on historical drag queen events, just how they operate, how it could not be deemed sexually explicit. I mean, that's typically what they do. Just like, for instance, last year, the drag queen event, it was defined as an educational event. Mm-hmm. But in its advertisement, as far as the brochure that was sent out, it had R-rated and would be equipped with alcohol. Alcohol was served during this educational event. So they just have a track record of it's not benign. Let's just say it's not benign. So that's why that language was put in there. If that answers your question.
Can I keep going, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Case.
Thank you. So, well, I think there's been an art form called female impersonators. I mean, they've been for hundreds of years, I guess, go back to Roman culture and others, but more like you can go to Las Vegas and you can purchase a ticket to see a female impersonator. Would that be a drag queen person? I'm just asking. Would that be banned?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Somebody impersonating a female. I do not know if that would be considered a drag queen. I mean, drag queens are pretty obvious. Just how they don't look like women. I mean, they really don't. So it's not really impersonating a woman, in my estimation, because it's something totally unnatural.
Mr. Chairman, if I keep going, but you don't define what a drag queen or drag queen event is. And is there a definition in statute elsewhere? It's just kind of an example, but it doesn't have a definition.
I'm not,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm not aware if there's a definition already in statute about drag queen events. I'm just going strictly off of what's in society right now. When they say a drag queen event, I know exactly what they're talking about.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I actually don't. And so I'm trying to say, I can understand the sexually explicit event, but I think in your testimony, you said that the LSO went back to you and said that if you wanted to catch drag queen events, you should add that in here because it wasn't clear to them that sexually explicit event meant a drag queen event. So there was, I mean, somebody's got some doubt about it. So if people can dress as the other sex and it's not sexually explicit, I think you testified that that would be banned by this bill as a matter of course.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. If you're talking about I guess a cross-dresser, I guess I wouldn't consider that a drag queen event.
Okay.
Because I've seen some cross-dressers, you know, and yeah, they wear women's clothing. If they're a man, they wear women's clothing. But the drag queen events are usually far and beyond just the dressing like a woman.
It's interesting. So, Mr. Chairman, it's interesting to me, like in Shakespeare's time, they couldn't have women be actresses. They couldn't perform plays. So men dressed as women to perform Shakespearean plays. All the ones that he wrote in the contemporary time that he wrote, there were no women in those plays, and all the women characters were played by men dressed as women as an art form. It's just, I find it fascinating. So, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll open it up for public comment. We have any public comment? Come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee. I'm Sarah Burlingame. I'm the Executive Director of Wyoming Equality, and we are in opposition to this bill. And I'm appreciative of the good representative's testimony because it gives us the opportunity, hopefully, to offer ourselves as a resource and clear up any confusion that might have come about. So the event that the representative was speaking about, a drag show that happened last year, even though Wyoming Equality didn't have any participation in it, I didn't get to attend, I was out of town, and it wasn't our event. Because it was a drag show and we're Wyoming Equality, a lot of people assumed that it was us, and so we got a lot of phone calls from around the state. And what I found was people who called really upset. I had a long phone call with a gentleman from Sublette County who had read an article and had heard that public monies were going to support a sexually lascivious event that he did not agree with and he did not want his taxpayer dollars to go to. But by having like a calm, reasonable conversation with him and walking through it, even though it wasn't my event, we came to the mutual understanding that it's not good for the people of Wyoming when the state takes too keen an interest on defining the minutia of what is sexual conduct and what isn't. And to the good representative's point that, you know, the Comstock laws of pornography, right? Like we know it when we see it. There's such an enormous variety of drag. There are drag kings and queens and in-betweens that you would not find them in this bill. There's nothing sexually lascivious, there is no conduct, unless you take the clear reading of the bill, which says anything that excites sexual arousal, in which case you have just opened the door wide to a really wide variety of activities, such as the clear display of an ankle, such as uncuffed sleeves, things that a reasonable person could say, I find that exciting and gratifying. And as I've said in other testimonials and other committees, I'm not comfortable, and I wasn't raised to have conversations about what sexually excites people and what doesn't. But when we continue bringing these bills, we continue having to have these pretty awkward public conversations. So the event in question that took place, there are 2 points of contention that I think keep getting repeated as misinformation. One is that the state was somehow involved in funding a sexually explicit activity, when the reality is that the state public health is interested in providing free and confidential testing to as many people as they possibly can. That is how you serve the public health and the common good, is when there is a large gathering of any kind of people, there is an open invitation, could they come in and do free and confidential testing? This happens at rodeos. This happens at all kinds of community events where a group of people have said, yes, public health is welcome to do free and confidential testing. And it just so happens that this event was created by a private nonprofit entity to provide assistance to people living with HIV and AIDS. So there is a good opportunity for a lot of overlap there of people to be interested in preventing the spread of sexually transmitted diseases in our community. And the angry gentleman from Sublette County that called me and was upset by this, the point that we really agreed on was that if this entity does its job, if this nonprofit raises the money that it tries to raise through this drag show, then they don't rely on any state or federal money. This is an opportunity for private citizens to raise money, and 100% of the profits, they have no overhead, goes directly to people living with HIV. Conservatives, progressives, people of all stripes can agree it's good when people get together, raise money, serve their community. And as far as the historicity of drag in our country and in our state, the first known drag show in the United States of America that we know of took place in Washington, D.C. And the gentleman who put it on, which was the template for the majority of all drag to come after it, did it to raise money. And he did it to raise money because he himself was formerly enslaved. And this was pre the Civil War. People were enslaved in the South, and he put on a drag show in Washington DC to raise funds so that people could be brought out of slavery into freedom. And even then, of course, there were questions about, was it legal? Could they do this? Did it violate the laws? But I think if they found their way, the same way that we have in Wyoming, when people were dying of HIV, drag queens and drag shows started showing up to provide nursing, to provide care, to provide food and gas and medicine for people who otherwise didn't have access to it. That's the history of it. The largest known drag show in Wyoming was probably put on by the GOP. I think most folks are familiar with a Fremont County tradition where the loser of a contest was dressed as a female. And we didn't see these kinds of bills then. We only saw them when we started to really politicize how people can appear in public. And as I'm happy to answer any questions that people have about the history of drag or what Wyoming Equality thinks this would open the state up to in terms of lawsuits, just particularly anything that depicts or simulates sexual conduct or sexual excitement. I mean, I think those are overly broad. The fact that if it's a drag queen event, I'm guessing that most folks who were at the university or anywhere else who wanted to still do this would just change it to a drag king event. And if you added that language into it, they would just change the name of it. Our people are very resourceful. They're a very creative community.
I have a quick question.
Absolutely.
Is there anywhere in this bill that forbids any of that? Because if there is, I'm not finding it.
Mr. Chairman?
I go back to your example, if an ankle or a sleeveless shirt excites me, it can still excite me because the government's not paying for the shirt or the capri pants or the shorts. I think this is just a funding question, not a behavioral question. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chairman. Our understanding of the bill is this is about any state funds that go to state and federal funds. Yeah, state and federal funds. And I think somewhere in here, it says the University of Wyoming, community colleges, school districts, department or institution, city, town, county, or political subdivision. So if any of those were to have an event like, say, father and daughter dance, or literally any other event, a 4th of July celebration, and someone were to say, hey, I believe that this violates this law. I believe that there was a dance that was put on, and I believe that it existed to excite sexual arousal. I don't see any other reading of it.
I think it just says the state can't fund the activity. And we're hung up on just the word drag queen, and I understand why that's the case. But it would include daddy and daughter dances that the state funded that were lewd or lascivious. It doesn't include all
Yeah, Mr.
daddy
Chairman.
daughter dances. And yeah, you're exactly right. Call it a drag king event. There's also an appeal process in here too. I think I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions? Senator French.
Not a question, Mr. Chairman. I just gonna say I agree with you. I think this is all about public funding and the public saying we don't like our funds going towards any of these activities. We don't want to pay for it. Now, if I think that's where it's at. I don't think it's making a judgment on these different activities. It's just saying, you know, I don't want my hard-earned money going to pay for this event. I think it's as simple as that.
Senator French? Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Senator French, I understand the point that you're making, but I would just call back to Senator Case's point that there can be one but not the other. So there absolutely are drag queens who are not sexually lascivious, whose whole personas are, we may differ over this word, but I would say wholesome. And so yes, they are a drag queen, but no, there is nothing sexually lascivious. And I would say that there are probably some, Article 14 issues over whether you are singling out one group of people over another.
Go ahead, Senator French.
I think people would differ on the description of wholesome.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Senator, I agree with you. There is a broad interpretation of what is wholesome.
As I look at this bill, I couldn't hire 5 strippers and have my friends over and have the state pay for that either.
Senator?
Would you agree with that?
Mr. Chairman, no, nor should you want to. But I don't think that the two are conflated. I don't believe that the sort of activities that public health and the public good sometimes intercept, that we have gotten a little bit too granular, and that we have decided that drag queens, which are a very small percentage of our population, and as I have mentioned, raise money and do a lot of good for our communities, deserve this kind of scrutiny. And I don't like to use incendiary language, but it does feel a bit like a witch hunt, like we are going to find these drag queens in our midst and we are going to punish them and make sure that they are not considered who we imagine when we imagine the public. And I think that does harm. I think we're a freedom-loving people in Wyoming, and that people can just choose to not go if they don't like those events.
Any other questions?
Sure, why not? Mr. Chairman, so I'm thinking more along the lines of, in college, I took theater. I really enjoy the theater program at Central Wyoming College in Riverton. It is like a dynamite program. And they sometimes perform things that we might find questionable. They did Jesus Christ Superstar. And I thought they did a fabulous job, but some people would not agree that that is a subject suitable for a taxpayer-funded theater program, for example. But there are a lot of plays, movies that feature men dressed as women, or vice versa. There are heroes and heroines. There are people from the Civil War that were females that enlisted and hid their identity and dressed as a man and served their country because they were so motivated. But you know, I can remember one piece of work with Dustin Hoffman, right? It was a really, really good comedy that everybody went to see. And if University of Wyoming Theater Department put on that play, the name escapes me now, but that would come under this by definition. And it's like, is this all worth doing over one event that $3,000 went into? Tootsie, that's what it was. It was Tootsie. It was a great one. Mrs. Doubtmeyer. I mean, there's a whole list of
Fire.
theater and art and movies that involve cross-dressing, I guess. And I'm just searching for right terms. I'm trying to get us to be tolerant here. So there.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
Senator Case, I guess the last thing I would say is, when I served in 2019, it was an honor, and one of the things that I'm the most proud of, that we passed a resolution in recognition of Larry Sissy Goodwin. For folks who aren't familiar with Sissy Goodwin, he was a Vietnam War vet. He was a hero. He was a very accomplished bull rider, which is important. And he was a cross-dresser, an old-fashioned cross-dresser, a man who wore women's clothing. And on account of it, you know, he was assaulted and jailed. No one disputed that he was a good father. He was a good member of the community, that he served his country with honor. But I would suggest that bills like these put a target on people who are a little bit different, and that the test of our fidelity to our constitutional rights is how much we can allow for things that we don't necessarily agree with, but we lean into the principle that free speech is important, and we may not like everything that happens, but we're better for it when we allow for the broadest expression of who we are.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Do
Chairman.
we, thank you. Do we have anybody else who wants to testify? Whoa.
Fools rush in. Or they're both covered.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Erin Taylor, and I represent the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees. And, you know, listening to this conversation and as this bill has proceeded, it's something that, and I'm not going to say that I'm up here and supporting or opposing. We're making sure that we can do what we need to do it. We heard that community colleges deliver arts programs, events. By and large, I do not believe they provide events that are considered explicit in that respect. But when you talk about theater or culture, I was even at a play a few months ago, and hearing this conversation today made me think that would that play fall under this act, and would someone there have had an opinion about it and having to go through an administrative procedures and this and that, and the board is responsible for all of that conversation. I think that you also have to think about the fact that events happen on our campuses, whether or not it's sanctioned by taxpayer dollars. So I have a lot of questions about this. And I know that the institutions would likely also have questions about this. I don't know if it's necessary. These are locally governed boards of trustees elected by the same people that elected all of you, and they're making good decisions with their taxpayer dollars. They are the stewards of those dollars, just like you are with the state funds. So, Mr. Chairman, I guess I wouldn't have anything more to say. I'd answer questions.
Mr. Chairman, Mike Smith with the University of Wyoming. I'm inadequately prepared, and I apologize, but I really just want to focus on, Mr. Chairman, the comment that folks don't want their money to fund these activities, which I totally understand. But I do want to point out the language that gives me a little pause in here is on page 2, line 19 and 20, where it goes beyond the use of state or federal funds, but also includes facilities or equipment or personnel, and what I'm thinking of is the effort at the university and probably the colleges as well, where we, again, not a First Amendment scholar by any means, but we try really hard not to make restrictions based on content. When a student group wants to host an outside speaker or an event, even if it's an event that our Board of Trustees, which is the entity authorized to determine under this bill whether it's appropriate or not, maybe they disagree with. But, outside kind of reasonable content, manner, and place restrictions under the First Amendment, we try to say, look, you're going to hear and see a lot of things on campus that you don't agree with, and that's part of being at a university. And so really, almost I really just want to focus on that the use of facilities and the janitor who cleans up afterwards. And, you know, maybe I get not sponsoring it, but contributing by allowing someone to rent the space as others can, I think may go a little too far for my taste. But again, appreciate you listening and letting me wing it here. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Elisa Butler. I'm the State Court Administrator for the Wyoming Judicial Branch. Mr. Chairman, I debated whether or not to get up and speak with you all here today, but I did, after reading through the bill a couple of times, and I apologize for us coming so late to the game, there are just a few concerns, and one thing I would just say is, within the judicial branch, obviously, we have a lot of cases that revolve around sexual content. We have sexual assault cases, criminal sexual assault cases, both with adults and minors. Obviously, we use state funds, state personnel, state facilities, state equipment to present those kinds of cases to the judges and to juries to make those determinations. And so I don't think that is the intent of the bill, is to preclude that kind of activity, but I do think that potentially there's some language there that it's broad enough that it could loop in those kinds of cases that come before our courts. And so, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to get up and provide that bit of testimony and answer any questions that the committee may have.
Well, thank you for your testimony. With that, we'll close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Move it. Move the bill.
It's been moved by Senator Ide,
Second.
seconded by Senator French.
Mr. Chairman, I would propose
Discussion?
a motion, an amendment.
Okay,
I would propose to delete line 10 on page 2. And that is the sexually explicit event shall include drag queen events. Make that motion.
do we have a second? Yes.
Yeah.
So all in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Opposed.
No.
Okay, that amendment has passed.
Mr. Chairman, I'd have another amendment.
Okay,
On line 19, after the word, I think I want to do this. I want to put paid in front of personnel. And then I want to delete facilities or equipment. If I could make it read right, it says, the community college shall use state or federal funds, pay personnel to, I guess we should say, or paid personnel to sponsor or contribute to a sexually explicit event. What I'm trying to do there is say that people can volunteer on their own time, not get paid. It's okay. It's not use of funds, so it would be funding or paying for people. If I could get a second, you never know in this group. I can hear the muttering. Usually I can count on Pappas, but he's not helping me out. Well, maybe it's confusing with the word paid, but I wanted to say shall use state or federal funds or personnel to sponsor or contribute to a sexually explicit event. Eliminate the facilities or equipment. Okay, thanks. I mean, if the students have a voluntary thing and they meet and they use a room at the university, whether or not rent's paid, under this definition that's in the bill, that would be in violation. And maybe the university didn't have anything to do with it. They're just, they let students use facilities. Literally, if,
The facilities are taxpayer-funded facilities, though, probably, sure,
sure,
yeah.
so it's a sidewalk at the university, and you can protest as you go across it, and take your shirt off if you want. I don't know, it's not the best amendment, but I'm getting at the issue of facilities or equipment. Writing a check for something, I kind of get, and hiring someone to put it on, I kind of get, but the rest of it, I don't get.
Okay, so you want to tell us what that amendment says again?
Okay.
Just walk us through it.
Line 19, we will insert the words "or paid personnel," and then we'll delete facilities or equipment. So it says, shall use state or federal funds or paid personnel to sponsor or contribute to a sexually explicit event.
All in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
Okay.
That one has failed.
It was a good try. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have anything more.
Mr. Chairman, with that amendment, I probably would have been an okay on this bill, because, we allow the use of our facilities for religious things on campus. We don't pay for them. We know we can't pay for them, right? We don't pay for religious things. Yeah, we allow that. We let them set up a booth in the union, or we let them use facility, but we don't pay them. I don't know, I think this is really discriminatory. We allow certain groups to do that and not allow these groups to do that. If we're not putting state dollars, and this bill is for state dollars, but I agree with my good senator from Fremont County that if we would have passed that last amendment, this would have been a palatable bill. But unfortunately, the committee didn't see it that way. Thank you.
Chairman. I'll be brief, we're late right now, but yeah, I'm on in favor of this bill. I mean, hear a lot of the discussion, and I like to hear my colleague over here talk about Shakespeare and Mrs. Doubtfire. Those are pretty, and I don't know if Shakespeare was sanctioned by, I don't like to use the state or the federal government, by the taxpayers. There's a difference there, and so I think, I think it's good to put some ropes around this thing so it doesn't get out of control. I think it's a good bill, so thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Donna, you want to call the roll?
Roll call vote on House Bill 134, as amended, taxpayer funds sexually explicit events prohibited. 2, Senator Case.
No.
Senator French.
Aye.
Senator Ide.
Aye.
Senator Pappas.
No.
Chairman McEwen.
Aye.
We have 3 aye and 2 no, Mr. Chairman.
Has passed committee, and we will adjourn.